The first impact didn't feel like something hitting the ship. It felt like something enormous had risen from beneath us and tried to lift the entire hull in one violent eruption. I had been leaning over the sonar scope when the deck pitched hard to starboard, sending me tumbling sideways and nearly slamming my head into the auxiliary console. The overhead lights flickered, the metal ribs of the bulkhead groaned in a way I'd never heard before, and from topside came the unmistakable scream of overstressed steel as one of the crane booms jerked violently against its mounting points. Even before the alarms began barking, I knew something had gone catastrophically wrong. The shock wave that rippled through the hull wasn't from weather, wasn't from machinery, and sure as hell wasn't from anything as simple as ocean swell. It felt alive. In the few seconds of stunned silence that followed, I pushed myself upright and grabbed for the console to steady myself as the ship rolled back. The sonar screen was a chaos of interference, thick white lines, static bursts, harmonic distortions, and jagged spikes that overwhelmed the entire bandwidth. Every hydrophone had lit up like a Christmas tree at once, all returning different noise patterns. That never happened unless something massive had touched us, something with so much acoustic presence it drowned out the ship's own signature. Another jolt hit the hull, this one deeper and lower. The deck heaved beneath my boots. Someone shouted behind me, Ramirez, I think, as several metal drawers flew open and slammed shut again as the vessel shuddered. The ship felt sluggish, like it was being pulled or dragged by something that didn't care about its size or mass. And then, beneath the cacophony of alarms and shouting, I heard it. A thick, wet scraping sound that vibrated through the steel underbelly of the vessel. Not the grinding of rock or sand, not the collision of debris. It was the sound of something fleshy and enormous sliding along the hull. I froze. Jesus Christ, I breathed, barely aware that I'd said it out loud. The intercom erupted with overlapping voices. Bridge to deck. Crane 2 is sheared loose. Engineering. Unexpected lateral force, starboard thrust compromised. Medical. Report to aft deck. But none of that mattered to me at the moment. My job was sonar. My world, right then, was the screen in front of me, and what I saw when it finally regained clarity made my stomach twist. A massive shape, longer than anything biological had any right to be, was rolling along our starboard side. The outline flickered as the system struggled to resolve it, but the core details remained. A huge, elongated mass with density readings far above those of fish or whales. Cold, dead, and drifting wrong. The heat signature was minimal, the reflectivity uneven. I adjusted gain, dropped the frequency spread, and filtered noise, and the shape sharpened enough to turn my blood cold. It was a corpse, not a whale, not a log, not debris. A massive, fleshy carcass sloughing against the hull, traveling with a sickening momentum that suggested both weight and decay. The ship had sideswiped it, or it had sideswiped us, but either way, it was now entangled in our slipstream, sliding along the hull like a drowned giant. I swallowed hard as the sonar image rotated with our drift. Bullhead, jawline, crescent curvature of the snout, then the unmistakable contour of serrated teeth, each the length of a man's forearm. Even distorted through sonar, they formed a jagged semicircle large enough to bite a small boat in half. My breath stalled in my chest. The megalodon corpse had broken free of containment. They had told us it was a large biological asset. They had told us its origin and classification were above our pay grade. They had used terms like marine anomaly, historic specimen, and deep-water retrieval product. But no amount of euphemistic language could disguise the truth I had seen with my own eyes 2 nights earlier when they brought the monstrosity aboard. Under floodlights, dangling from reinforced slings, the thing had looked like it had been dredged up from a prehistoric grave. The flesh was thick and rubbery, mottled in patches of pale gray and rotting blue, black, with scars so deep they revealed bone that looked more like armor plating. Its eyes were clouded over completely huge milky orbs the size of dinner plates. Its jaw had been slack, revealing rows of triangular teeth, some broken, some missing, many intact, set into gum tissue so tough the bosun had to saw twice to remove a sample. But it wasn't just the size or the teeth, it was the age of the thing. The scars looked ancient. The skeleton, from what we saw of it when the techs examined a tear in the carcass, seemed almost fossilized. Several men whispered the same word, quietly, as if saying it too loudly would conjure the creature from death. Megalodon. Of course, we all knew that was impossible. Megalodon had died out 3 million years ago, but no one on the deck that night had dared to express that doubt as the colossal corpse swayed above them. Instead, they had hoisted it into the containment bay, drained seawater into the tank, and welded the hatch shut with chains and locking plates, all so the Navy could tow it to a trench deep enough to bury it forever. Now it was loose, and bigger problems followed dead things, because nothing dies in the ocean without something else hunting it first. The ship lurched hard again as the carcass slid past midship, catching on a protruding stabilizer fin. The vessel groaned like metal being bent by a giant hand. I could feel the reverberations through my feet. The dead shark, or whatever it was, dragged downward with its own weight, pulling part of the stern sideways for a moment. I calibrated sonar again, trying to filter out the bloom of noise from the collision. As the corpse rotated in the swell, its body cast a long, distorted shadow. For a second, I thought it was splitting open. But then I realized the tear, an enormous gash running along its flank, was old, ragged, and deep enough to expose vertebrae thick as steel beams. Something had wounded it, something huge, something intelligent, because that wound didn't look like an injury from rocks or another shark. It looked purposeful, like a territorial bite, a challenge, a kill strike. And then sonar found something else, a second mass, large, moving. It appeared first as a faint echo, a subtle downturn in the noise bed. Then it grew clearer, a long, sweeping curve of density descending from below the corpse's path. The ship rattled as if responding to pressure shifts beneath us. The deeper readings pulsed in a rhythmic pattern, out of sync with waves but perfectly aligned with movement. Something alive, something massive, something rising. My pulse hammered in my ears. At first I convinced myself it was the corpse sliding deeper into the water column. But the directionality was wrong. The dead megalodon was drifting downward and aft, sliding toward the trench lip. This new shape was coming from deeper still, emerging from the darkness like a leviathan stirred by the scent of carrion. Every instinct inside me screamed. The sonar image sharpened. The new mass glided upward with smooth, controlled motion. It wasn't drifting. It wasn't flailing. It was swimming. The shape filled more of the lower arc of the display. Longer than the corpse, wider, heavier, a heat signature, faint but present, contrasted against the cold trench water. I stepped closer, barely breathing. The creature circling below was alive, and whatever had killed the megalodon was now rising toward our ship. The hull vibrated with a new resonance, low at first, then building, not mechanical, not geological. It was a sound the ocean made when something unbelievably huge displaced it. A mass of water being pushed aside by something that moved with absolute dominance. Then we felt it, a heavy rolling pressure. Wave washed against the aft quarter. The ship rocked, not sharply, but with a deep, heavy sway like the ocean had inhaled under us. Crewman topside shouted as gear shifted. The crane boom groaned loudly. A toolbox slid off a rack and crashed on the floor behind me. The creature brushed the hull, not hard enough to damage it, just enough to test, like a predator investigating a potential rival. The sound that followed wasn't a roar or a call. It was a bone-shaking tremor that rippled upward through the hull plating and vibrated in my teeth. A low infrasonic blast that triggered half a dozen alerts, knocked a stack of printed logs off the counter, and made the fluorescent lights flicker ominously. The men in sonar went quiet. I realized then, with a clarity that felt almost too sharp, we were no longer the observers. We were no longer the hunters. We were the intruders in someone else's territory. And whatever was rising toward us was not curious. It was asserting dominance. The sonar return swelled into a near-solid wall of moving mass. I could see the curvature, its head, or what I thought was its head, cresting the lower arc before splitting to either side. It was turning, adjusting its angle, controlling its rise like a predator preparing to intercept a moving target. The intercom burst to life, bridge relaying frantic updates. Unnatural turbulence, rudder not responding, mass beneath aft keel, prepare for evasive, but evasive maneuvering against something that dwarfed our vessel was a joke. The creature rose faster, every instinct sharpened into a razor line of dread. It wasn't the megalodon's corpse we had to worry about. It was whatever had left the bite marks, whatever had killed it, whatever now hovered beneath our ship, studying us, circling like a shadow that owned the entire trench. The creature made one final deliberate pass under the hull. Water curled, steel hummed, sonar flared, and then it began to rise directly toward us. When the creature surged upward beneath us, the water didn't churn like you'd expect. There was no froth, no messy turbulence. Instead, the ship lifted in a slow, inevitable swell, an upward displacement so vast that our hull rode it the way a bottle rides the crest of a breaking wave. The deck tilted under my boots just enough to tell me we'd been lifted several feet, and the sudden change in pressure made the overhead ducts groan. It was the smoothness that terrified me most. A whale breaches with violence. A submarine ascends with machinery. But this rise carried purpose, intention, the precision of a living machine. For a moment the ship hovered, suspended in the creature's wake, and the air inside sonar thinned with a tension so heavy it felt like another presence had entered the room. Every man was frozen, waiting for the continuation of a movement too large for our minds to hold. When the next surge came, it was so gentle that it seemed almost impossible that it originated from anything alive. The ship rolled 2 degrees to port, then settled, as though the monster beneath us had simply brushed the keel with the side of its body. "What the hell is it doing?" Ramirez whispered. No one answered. I didn't think it was attacking. Not yet. It felt more like a territorial sweep, a controlled rise, a passive recognition. The creature was identifying us the same way we identify unknown contacts, by circling them, feeling the water distortion, reading the acoustic signature. It was learning us. The boat dipped as the ship heeled slightly forward. The helmsman's frantic voice spilled from the overhead speakers. "Bridge to sonar. Something's creating a pressure gradient under us. Trim correction ineffective. Rudder and bow thrusters lagging." A sharp clap echoed through the hull as the creature's massive form slid upward along our starboard side. It wasn't a collision. It was too soft, too measured, more like the brush of a giant fin. I stared at the sonar screen. The mass beneath us grew clearer as it rose, the reflection widening into a shape almost too large to fit on the display. Sonar software wasn't built to represent anything bigger than a blue whale or a surfaced sub. It tried to stretch the returns but couldn't keep scale. The entire lower quadrant of my screen pulsed with a wall of rising acoustic energy. And then something happened that made the hair on my arms stand straight up. The creature slowed, not because of water drag, not because of inertia. It slowed the way a living thing slows, by choice. It held its position beneath us, hovering with a control I associated only with apex predators and advanced machines. The shape distorted, resolving into 2 massive ridges curving upward from its head, or what I thought was its head. The sonar couldn't map the interior with clarity. Too much mass, too close. Then, slowly, the creature began to ascend again, this time fast. A deep thrum rolled through the water, vibrating every bolt in the bulkhead. The hull shook lightly, the way glass rattles when a distant truck rumbles past. The creature was no longer feeling us. It was closing the distance, with purpose. At 8 meters below the keel, the creature's presence made the ship lurch upward a second time. A sudden, lifting displacement that had no right coming from flesh and bone. I stumbled, grabbed a rail, and watched the sonar returns flare into an almost solid smear of noise. "It's coming up," I shouted. "Directly beneath us." The bridge must have seen it coming too, because a shrill whistle sounded overhead. Collision alert. I'd never heard it outside of drills. That sound meant one thing: brace. The ship jerked violently. Not from an impact, from avoidance. The creature had veered sideways at the last moment, sliding beneath our starboard bow in a maneuver that told me everything I needed to know about its intelligence. It had gotten close enough to show dominance, close enough to make us feel its size, but it hadn't struck us, not fully. It had tested the gap between fear and destruction, and it knew there was still room to push harder. Another pulse hit us, this one so deep it vibrated in the line of my jaw. Consoles flickered. A stack of logs toppled off a shelf. Somewhere down in engineering, a metal plate popped loudly. "What is it doing?" Ramirez whispered, voice low and strangled. "It's communicating," Ward said behind me, breathless. She had come down from topside after the first hit and arrived in sonar pale and shaking, her damp hair plastered to her forehead from the misted spray thrown over the deck. "And it's not calling to us." That stopped me cold. The creature pulsed again. The sonar captured the waveform, deep, curved, then sharply rising. Not random, not biological noise, a pattern. "Jesus," I whispered. "It's sending a signal." "To what?" Ramirez asked. Ward stared at the screen with wide, glassy eyes. Not what, who. Before I could process that, the ship jolted sharply to port as the creature's massive body pressed against us. Loose gear clattered across the deck. Someone outside sonar swore loudly as he stumbled. For a brief moment, we rocked dangerously close to listing. The creature dragged the hull downward, then released. The sudden buoyancy correction made the ship slap back into the water column with a slap so loud I felt it through the floor. The overhead lights flickered, regained stability, then flickered again. Then sonar caught a new return, a second shape, larger, deeper, and moving fast. My breath faltered. "Sonar, are you seeing what I'm seeing?" Ramirez asked. I couldn't speak. The new mass was at least twice the length of the megalodon corpse, and the creature that had risen beneath us had clearly been the victor in that battle. If something twice its size was answering its call, then we were dealing with a hierarchy of predators older and more brutal than anything we had ever recorded. The second mass was rising, fast, too fast. "Bridge," I called into the mic. Multiple contacts. One under the bow, another rising from deeper in the trench, both enormous. The reply was breathless. "Sonar, are we under attack?" "I don't know," I answered truthfully. "But whatever these things are, they're not behaving like animals. They're acting like—" I couldn't finish the sentence, because the first creature surged up again, this time along our port side. The hull shifted under its weight. A deep tactile pressure pushed up through the keel as though the creature had lifted the ship slightly with its flank. The ship rolled, tools slid, papers fluttered, steel creaked, and then it hit us. A massive, glancing blow along the underside of the bow, hard enough to rattle the entire ship and send the helmsman screaming for manual trim override. The ship pitched downward 5 degrees, enough for several men to lose their balance and slam into consoles. Sonar screamed with overload distortion. "It's attacking!" someone cried. "No," Ward said in a whisper. "It's corralling us." The words hit me like a punch. Predators corral their prey when hunting as a pack. The second creature was getting closer, and the first was positioning us. I felt cold sweat beat along my spine. The ship's engines roared as the bridge fought to steer us away from the trench lip. The deep water disposal mission had brought us dangerously close to waters no surface vessel liked to linger in. The pressure shifts were unpredictable. The trench walls created acoustic dead zones, and now apex predators were closing in. The hull flexed again. A shudder traveled through the ship from stern to bow. The screws hissed in cavitation as they spun uselessly against shifting water. "They're funneling us," I whispered. Ramirez stared at the screen, pale. Toward what? The sonar returns sharpened. A third shape, less defined, deeper still. And then something happened that made every man in sonar stop breathing. The first creature pulsed again, and 2 other pulses answered. My throat went dry. Ward clamped a hand over her mouth. Ramirez backed away from the screen as if it could explode. 3 distinct signatures, 3 massive returns, 3 apex predators answering one another. We weren't dealing with a lone survivor of a prehistoric lineage. We were in the middle of a gathering, a convergence. The ocean around us throbbed with infrasonic pressure waves. Each pulse pushed water in measurable gradients, altering our trim and forcing the ship to compensate. The hull hummed like a tuning fork struck by a deity. The first creature rose again, slow, deliberate, positioning itself horizontally beneath the hull like an aircraft carrier moving under a dinghy. And then it lifted us, fully. The ship rose several feet in the water column, buoyancy overridden by sheer mass and water displacement. The sensation was sickening, being hoisted by something alive that dwarfed even a naval vessel. Men shouted, steel screamed, alarms blared, and then the creature released. We dropped. The ship slammed back into the water column with a violent splash that shook the entire deck structure. A light bulb burst overhead. The entire starboard corridor echoed with the metallic wail of strained supports. The second creature was almost upon us. And somewhere, deeper still, the third answered again. The first had lifted us not in an attack, but in a signal, a demonstration, a warning, or an invitation. Either possibility terrified me. The sonar scope erupted as all 3 returns neared shallow enough depths to overlap. I could barely interpret the chaos, a swirl of overlapping signals, noise clouds, and distorted outlines, but I could see enough to know this. They were converging, and we were the focus point. The pressure wave that followed made the air feel thicker in my lungs. My ribcage tightened, the walls vibrated. I felt the deck quiver, a pulse from below, so deep it was almost a seismic event. The first creature, our original shadow, began circling faster, and then the second arrived. The ship jolted, a collision, real this time, hard enough to dent steel. The bow lurched sideways as something the size of a house rammed us from below. Not a glancing swipe, a deliberate blow, a test strike. The hull bent inward by inches. My teeth rattled. Ward stumbled into me, grabbing my arm. "It's not territory," she whispered hoarsely. "They're not fighting us." "That felt like a fight," Ramirez snapped. "No," she said, shaking her head, her eyes wide with horror. "That felt like curiosity." A third pulse rose from the depths. The second creature pulsed back. The first responded. 3 calls intertwined. 3 titans speaking in a language older than continents. And then the ship froze. Not movement, not propulsion, not trim. Frozen, held, the return on sonar expanded, massive horizon spanning, surrounding us like a living canyon. The third creature had arrived. Something bigger than the corpse, bigger than the first 2, bigger than anything the Navy had ever dreamed of. The water around us shifted. The ship tilted. The hull moaned. We weren't being attacked. We were being assessed. And whatever decision these creatures made next was going to determine whether any man aboard lived long enough to understand why the Navy wanted the megalodon corpse dumped in the first place. The ship didn't just stop moving, it stopped existing as a vessel with any meaningful control over its own fate. A warship is supposed to dominate the water, cut through it, command it, bend it to its will through steel and engineering and propulsion. But in that moment, the ocean felt like it had decided we were no longer a participant in the hierarchy of things that mattered. The water thickened around us like syrup, and the hull seemed to settle into an invisible mold shaped by something larger and more powerful than any machine we had ever built. The screws spun uselessly, thrashing against a pressure field that held us as securely as a vice. The overhead ducts groaned as the ship leaned slightly aft, pitched by a precise, controlled force, not a current, not turbulence. Something was holding us in place, something so big it didn't have to struggle against the combined thrust of our engines, it simply countered it with the shifting weight of its own body. All around us, the sonar screen glowed with a wall of interference, a curtain of thick acoustic echoes that blocked out the ocean beyond. It was the presence of something so massive that the hydrophones couldn't penetrate it. They could only pick up what bounced back from its surface. "Dear God," Ramirez whispered. His voice didn't feel like it was coming from him. It felt like it was leaking out of the cracks in a man who had suddenly realized he was trapped in a cage made of water with creatures the size of apartment complexes. I adjusted the gain again, hands trembling despite trying to steady them. The screen flickered, fighting to make sense of the impossible. Through a distortion, I could see the broad, curved forms of two gigantic silhouettes pressing close to our hull, one along the port bow, the other sweeping along the starboard midsection. They were not attacking. They were moving with the slow, deliberate grace of apex predators circling something they were trying to identify. The third shape, the largest, held back just far enough that we couldn't get a full outline, but close enough that its acoustic signature filled the water with a constant vibration. "They're coordinated," I whispered. Ward didn't disagree. Her pale face was lit by the green glow of the sonar display, eyebrows drawn low in an expression that looked somewhere between terror and scientific awe. "This isn't territorial," she murmured, voice shaking. "They're communicating. They're comparing us, the same way orcas evaluate prey before choosing a flanking strategy." My skin went cold. Comparing us, evaluating us, discussing us. I wasn't sure which possibility was worse, that they thought we were food or that they thought we were competition. The creature to starboard drifted closer, the pressure wave of its mass brushing against the hull like a rolling storm front. The deck shifted under my feet by a fraction of an inch. The hull groaned, not from impact but from proximity. "Bridge reports steering is non-functional," the intercom snapped. "Rudder unresponsive, thrusters cycling. Helm requesting sonar confirmation of hull entrap." A sudden thump reverberated through the ship, interrupting the transmission. Not sharp, not violent. A soft, heavy tap, like an enormous knuckle rapping on steel. Something had touched us gently. A chill raced along my spine. The shape nearest our hull paused. It hovered, waited. Then the same tapping sensation came again, slightly stronger, right under sonar's deck. I felt it through my boots before I heard it, a low, resonant pair of taps. Tap, tap. The room went silent. "What the hell?" Ramirez whispered. "It's testing the hull," Ward said with a hushed certainty that made my stomach drop. "Checking strength, checking density, the same way sharks bump boats to gauge stability before biting. Except no shark could produce that kind of displacement. Not even the largest great white ever recorded. This was something else, something that had already killed a megalodon. Something bigger. Tap, tap. Another vibration rolled through the deck, slightly stronger this time. The creature was becoming bolder, more confident, more curious. The bow dipped as the water around the hull shifted again, the sort of subtle pressure gradient change you can only feel if you've spent your life inside steel tubes beneath the ocean. "Brace for port disturbance," someone screamed over the intercom. The ship lurched violently to port as one of the silhouettes outside rammed us, not hard enough to breach the hull, but hard enough to slam several crewmen into bulkheads. A metal locker toppled. A mug shattered. The fluorescent lights flickered again. But this wasn't an attack. The sonar image told me exactly what had happened. The second creature was forcing us into alignment with the largest one. They wanted us oriented a certain way. Why? So we were easier to swallow or easier to study? Another pulse rumbled across the hull, a long, slowly rising vibration like a subharmonic song. The other creatures responded in kind. The air inside sonar seemed to vibrate. My ribcage hummed with the infrasonic resonance. Ward's hand trembled as she grabbed the console. "They're talking to one another about us," she whispered hoarsely. "It's a collaborative behavior. Coordinated." The ship jolted again, this time upward as something swam directly beneath the keel. The force lifted us several inches. A box slid across the floor. Ramirez swore under his breath. No predator lifted a vessel that size without a reason. "Sonar," the intercom barked. "Rudder and propulsion have gone fully dead in the water. Repeat, we are dead in the water." Attempting emergency ballast adjustments. Another heavy bump interrupted the message, this one from starboard again, pressing hard enough to tilt the ship 5 degrees. They were done testing. They were positioning. My pulse pounded in my throat as the sonar screen flickered with the unmistakable indication of a third movement, this one from the massive shape looming off our bow. The largest creature began to rise, slowly, deliberately, powerfully. It ascended from the trench like a living mountain, its acoustic shadow spreading across the entire lower half of the screen. The smaller two drifted aside, clearing a path as if they were making room for a king. The hull beneath my feet thrummed. Ward exhaled shakily. "Is coming to inspect us directly." No, not inspect, decide. The water around us vibrated with a deep infrasonic resonance that made the lights flicker. My knees felt weak, my teeth buzzed. Then, suddenly, the deck tilted downward. The giant was passing directly beneath the bow. We all braced. Instinctively, as a wave of pressure lifted the vessel from below. It wasn't a single body part. No fin, no snout, no strike. It was simply the effect of something colossal moving slowly beneath us. So colossal it displaced the water in a lifting wave the ship had no defense against. It rose, and it paused beneath the hull. Then it came up, not as a strike, as an emergence. The gigantic mass pressed against our keel with a force so steady and immense that the bow lifted several feet before slamming back down. Panels rattled. A support beam groaned. Dust fell from the overhead pipes. The ship began drifting backward, not by current, not by engine, by suction. The enormous creature's ascent created a vertical pull, a vacuum that nudged our vessel toward it like a leaf drawn toward a drain. "Sonar, we're being pulled toward the bow," the intercom snapped. "I know," I shouted. "It's rising directly under us." The creature breached the first 100 feet beneath the surface of the ship, its massive shadow spreading across the display like a cloak of darkness. And then the strangest moment of the night happened. Something scraped the hull. Not claws, not teeth, not force, texture, a long, rough, sandpaper-like scrape that deviated in density. It was touching us with something textured, something that felt like thick, ancient hide. I froze. That was not megalodon skin. That was something far older, far more armored, far more advanced. The scrape moved along the hull like a hand trailing across a tabletop. It was feeling us, studying us. What could possibly be this big? Ramirez choked out. No one answered. The scrape traveled the length of the hull, then paused at midsection. The pressure shifted. A deep, rolling wave pushed us to starboard, smooth even, like the creature was repositioning itself for maximum leverage. And then the impact came. It wasn't violent. It wasn't chaotic. It wasn't an attack. It was a shove, a calculated, controlled push that rolled the vessel 20 degrees to port and held it there like an adult rolling a child's toy in their palm. The ship's structure groaned in protest. Ward grabbed my arm. "It's checking our stability. It's measuring us." Measuring us for what? A second shove came from starboard. A smooth, steady pressure that almost felt like it was nudging us into alignment with something. And then I saw it. The trench, the sonar feed, the clearer parts at least, showed the drop-off looming beneath us. The creatures were positioning us over the trench. They wanted us above deep water. My lungs tightened. The tactical interpretation hit me like a gut punch. Predators drown prey by pushing them into deep water. They kill opponents by forcing them off stable terrain. They handle threats by isolating them. Before I could voice the thought, the largest creature pulsed once more, this time with an intensity that made several consoles flicker out completely. The room dimmed, then returned to emergency levels. My teeth rattled. My ribcage hummed. The two smaller creatures echoed back, a command, a response, a coordination. They were ready. The ship drifted another few meters toward the trench. The bow dipped over nothing but black, featureless void on the sonar. The drop was steep, the water was cold. The pressure would kill us long before the fall ended, assuming the hull didn't implode first. Then the creature beneath us moved faster, much faster, a rapid upward surge that brushed us yet again, lifted us, paused, and then released. We slammed down. The hull boomed like a struck bell. A seam groaned dangerously near the aft corridor. Someone screamed as they fell. We were being tested. We were being maneuvered. We were being judged. And then the largest creature rose again, its massive echo swelling up the screen like a tidal wave of density. The smaller two flanked it. 3 predators, 3 apex creatures. 3 sets of intentions converging, and then they pushed, all 3 at once, a coordinated, devastating shove. The ship jolted violently toward the trench. Everything not bolted down slid across the deck, the bow tilted, the hull screamed, and we began to fall. The first second of the fall felt like a miracle. The bow dipped sharply, the stern lifted for a heartbeat, and for that one impossibly brief moment, physics hesitated before it took hold. Every man in sonar held his breath because the ship seemed almost weightless, balanced precariously on the edge of nothing. Then gravity reclaimed us in a single violent lurch, and the bow dropped into darkness with a force that tore a gasp from every throat on deck. We fell, not like a vessel descending through water, not like a submarine in a controlled dive. We fell the way a stone falls when it slips from a cliff, fast, helpless, and utterly at the mercy of whatever waited below. The nose pitched downward at an angle steep enough that the forward deck plates groaned, and unsecured equipment slid across the floor in a metallic avalanche. The fluorescent lights flickered, then stabilized in a dim, buzzing glow as the emergency power grid compensated for the shock. The sound inside the hull was the worst part. Water pressure didn't scream. It pressed. It squeezed. It groaned in deep, resonant waves. But this was chaos. The ship rattled like a tin can kicked downstairs. Pipes shuddered. Bolts shook. Locker doors slammed open and shut, banging wildly as the vessel plunged toward the trench. It weaved as it fell, jerking left, then right, like something below was disturbing the water in violent, unpredictable currents. But I knew better. The creatures weren't done with us. They hadn't pushed us into the trench and left us to die. This wasn't cruelty. It was curiosity. And now they were watching how we behaved under freefall. Ramirez clung to the console rail beside me, his knuckles white, his eyes wide with disbelief. Ward was crouched on one knee, one hand slammed against the deck to keep herself from sliding. Her forward. Her face was drenched with sweat, not from heat, but from sheer terror. She wasn't built for the sea. She wasn't trained for this. Yet she understood more than any of us what was happening. "They're not trying to kill us," she said, voice shaking. "They're testing our descent. They want to see how long it takes us to lose control." It was the kind of observation that made the room colder. The deck pitched another few degrees downward. I saw the depth scatter shift on the sonar screen as water pressure climbed in uneven waves. The hull moaned under the load. We were nowhere near crush depth, but the inconsistency of the descent made everything worse. The ocean didn't like unpredictability, and neither did steel. Suddenly the ship jolted left, hard. A thunderous impact reverberated along the port side. Not sharp enough to puncture, but powerful enough to knock several men off their feet. A support bracket snapped overhead and clanged to the deck. I gripped the console harder as the sonar screen erupted in a bloom of acoustic interference. One of the creatures had rammed us sideways, not to kill us, to correct our angle, to keep us falling in the direction they wanted. Ward's breathing hitched. There, guiding the fall, the creature struck again, starboard now. A gentler hit, a tap compared to the last one, but strategically placed to tilt our bow downward another 2 degrees. We fell faster. The mounting pressure made my ears ache. The hydrophones whined with the strain as the water roared past us. The hull trembled. Another seam groaned. My stomach lurched into my throat as gravity and buoyancy fought and lost. I forced myself to tear my eyes from the sonar screen long enough to check the depth gauge. 300 feet, 400, 550. We were dropping toward a trench where the bottom didn't show up on our instruments. A trench deep enough to bury anything the Navy never wanted found again. A trench deep enough for monsters to live unnoticed. The creatures followed us down. I could see them now, 3 titanic silhouettes flanking the ship like escorts. They glided with a grace so profoundly unnatural for their size that it bordered on otherworldly. Their movements were deliberate, synchronized, coordinated by a language of deep pulses that reverberated through the hull like a drumbeat. The largest one descended ahead of us, leading the fall. The second flanked our port side, controlling lateral drift. The third swam starboard, matching our speed with obscene fluidity. They were shepherding us into annihilation. The pressure wave from the lead creature rolled upward through our bow like the wake of a passing freight ship, but deeper. So deep it vibrated my teeth. The sonar screen flickered again, trying to keep up with the distortion. Through the interference I saw outlines, long, ridged, armored. A body plan not like a shark, not like a whale, older, harder, engineered for crushing victims with blunt force as easily as biting them. "What are they doing?" Ramirez whispered. Ward swallowed, deciding what we are. Her words lingered uncomfortably in the air. Then the ship stopped falling, just like that. One moment we were plummeting toward oblivion. The next we were suspended, mid-water, buoyancy returning as though nothing had happened. The sudden stop threw men forward into consoles. A sharp metallic clang echoed through sonar as a panel broke loose and dropped. Someone in the corridor outside shouted in pain. Something in engineering sparked. But the creatures had stopped pushing. Now they watched. I saw their silhouettes hovering just beyond the flicker of our floodlights, enormous shadows drifting in a slow, circular pattern. The largest creature's echo filled the lower screen like a spinning continent. The other two maintained a distance that was unmistakably intentional, equidistant, forming a triangle around us with military precision. "Sonar," came the shaky voice of the helmsman over the intercom. "We're holding depth at 700 feet, but instruments aren't reflecting any natural buoyancy. I don't know what to call this. We're being stabilized by external force." Ward's breathing was shallow. "They're controlling the water around us." I forced myself to focus. The sonar screen was resolving now that the worst of the descent had stopped. I adjusted the spread, filtered out the high-frequency noise, and tuned into the lowest band where the creature's infrasonic pulses rang. The signals were clearer, cleaner, more distinct, and more frequent. The creatures were communicating among themselves in real time, analyzing our behavior during the fall, sharing data. Not random noise, not instinct, not animal confusion. Intelligence. The largest creature pulsed a deep note, so deep it rattled loose objects across the room. The other two responded with shorter bursts. The sequence repeated. Again, a pattern. "Oh my God," Ward whispered. "They're triangulating us." "Why?" Ramirez demanded, voice cracking. "Why triangulate a ship?" She looked at him with eyes full of scientific terror. "Because they're working together to determine our shape, density, and vulnerability." The largest shape drifted closer. The bow dipped again, slightly, but enough to make the light sway. I watched, paralyzed, as the sonar return stretched toward the hull until it merged with it. The creature was pressing its head, or what looked like its head, against our bow. The steel groaned. Another pulse shook through the water. Then the creature rose, slowly, purposefully, like someone examining an object with their hands. The creature traced the line of the hull with the broad curve of its armored dorsal ridges. The pressure caused the bow to tilt upward, then the force eased as the massive body drifted along our underside. It wasn't a glide. It wasn't a bump. It was inspection. The monster was feeling us, the way we had run gloved hands along its dead prey 2 nights earlier. The hull rang with the vibrational signature of something rough and scaled brushing its length. Thick hide, heavy armor plating. The sound was not smooth like shark skin. It was textured, coarse, worn, a living vessel traversing ours. Then came the worst moment. The creature paused at midship. Its silhouette bloomed across the lower screen. And then it pulsed again, too deep to be audible, too powerful to ignore. The entire ship vibrated. Every rib in my chest buzzed. My bones felt like tuning forks, and for the first time in my life I felt the unmistakable sensation of being scanned. Not acoustically, not visually, not biologically. Something deeper, a cognitive presence examining the boundaries of my body from the outside. Ward stumbled, clutching her temples. It's feeling us inside the hull," she gasped. "Not the metal, the people." My blood ran cold. The pulse continued for several seconds, then stopped abruptly. The creatures reacted instantly. Both flankers pulsed back. Short, sharp, high intensity. Acknowledgement signals. Confirmation. The largest creature had learned something, and the other two received it like orders. What did it learn?" Ramirez stammered. Ward stared blankly at the screen. I think it was identifying what parts of the ship were alive. Before we could process that, something slammed the stern. A blunt, colossal ram that knocked everyone off their feet. The ship bucked. The hull boomed like a gong. A high-pitched alarm screamed through sonar. "Impact aft. Structural strain at 36%, the intercom shouted. The second creature rammed us again, this time directly into the trench's outer edge. The bow dug downward into colder water. The deck tilted sharply. The third creature pulsed from below. A command. The first creature pulsed back. Agreement. Coordination. "Brace!" I screamed, gripping the console with everything I had. The ocean around us shifted. Water pressure surged. The hull twisted, and then the largest creature opened its jaws. Not physically, not in our sight, but the sonar didn't lie. A maw the size of a small room unfolded underneath our bow. Rows of jagged teeth appeared as acoustic shadows, a void in the water, a canyon of death. It rose toward us. Fast, very fast. Ward screamed. Ramirez froze. I felt the air leave my lungs. The creature was going to swallow the bow, and nothing on earth could stop it.